How did someone with your background get here? When I first started teaching at Marine Corps University in the fall of 2016, I got versions of this question from everywhere: family, friends, students, and colleagues. And when I walked into faculty orientation into a room full of 25 men in camouflage, I wondered the answer to that question myself. You hear so much about the importance of fit in the workplace. I didn't think I would ever fit in. I learned that day that the school's unofficial mission was to train warfighters. I'm a human rights scholar. I had no military background. I was armed for this job only with a law degree and a PhD. And of course, I was the only woman in that room. But something really strange happened by the end of my first year there. When I was the only woman in the room, I stopped noticing. I'd simply become part of the team. There's a saying in the military that leadership is not about rank. That saying was surely designed for service members by service members relating to each other. But I found that it was true for me as well. I don't even have a rank. And yet, I was considered to be a leader in my small corner of the Department of Defense. But working with the Marine Corps has taught me that leadership is not really about gender either. It's simply about respect for people, for their potential, and what they can contribute to a team. Now, don't get me wrong, no one at work has forgotten that I'm a woman. It's just that my gender didn't matter in the ways you might expect. The Marine Corps doesn't exactly have the best reputation when it comes to women and diversity. Only about 8% of the Marine Corps is currently female. When the Marines United social media scandal broke on campus in 2017, we had some challenging seminar discussions. And there have been plenty of other moments when I've been acutely aware of my gender, like the students' required combat fitness test, or when someone accidentally calls me sir. But overall, my gender hasn't gotten in the way of my doing my job. It's actually helped me to serve my country better. At the end of that first year, my female students came to me and told me that they looked up to me. I was absolutely shocked. These female students are my personal heroes. They've been in the military for 10 or 15 years as officers. Short of the presidency, women in the military is to me the ultimate glass ceiling. And women just got a lot closer to the presidency. So these women explained to me that my job was important, not just because I was doing it well, but because I was a woman doing it. Many of my students and many of my colleagues had worked with very few women before, if any at all. They'd never seen one give a lecture in front of 250 military officers, much less speak at the United Nations. So my female students recognized that my being there at Marine Corps University was important to the military overall. And they told me I needed to start thinking about myself more intentionally as a leader. As a professor, when your students tell you something like this, you take it very seriously. So I hit the books. I wanted to find out what makes women leaders succeed in the workplace. The first thing I found out, though, was that I was asking the wrong question. What I should have been asking was what makes good leaders great. So before I tell you what I've learned, please give me some Zune reactions if you've ever heard anything like this. If you want to be a leader, what you should do is find a great man, maybe someone like Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther King, and imitate him. Reactions? Yes, thought so. All right, me too. And this great man theory was, in fact, the classic way, still is, of teaching leadership from elementary school, where I learned it, all the way up through business school. And there's validity to it. There's a lot of really wonderful men out there. The problem is that for those of us who don't look like those great men, for whatever reason, it doesn't work. We can't imitate them and also be our authentic selves. I also found out that there's a lot we don't know about how women succeed in the workplace and why, because there's just not a lot of data out there. Many of the large studies have been done on organizations that are predominantly male or have mostly male leadership, like the military or sports teams or corporate America. And so few women have broken the glass ceiling in those organizations that it's really difficult to tell and compare systematically what has made them succeed. So, what do we know? What can we find out? We can survey people and find out what traits they want to see in their leaders, what traits they value most in their leadership. And here's where it got really interesting to me. Many of those traits that make good leaders great are most closely associated with women. They're considered to be feminine leadership traits. I'd heard so much about how my gender would hold me back in the workplace. And yet, research suggests that might not be the case. So, what are these traits? There are a number of studies out there, but I'm just going to give you a few examples. In the book, The Athena Doctrine, a bestseller, of course, named after the goddess of war and wisdom, authors John Gerzema and Michael D'Antonio surveyed 32,000 people in 13 countries all over the world. They gave them 125 human behavioral traits and asked them to rank them as masculine, feminine, or neither. And then they surveyed another 32,000 people and asked them what traits they most value in their leadership. The traits most associated with feminine quickly rose to the top. 4,000 students at the United States Naval Academy were surveyed and came up with similar results. The words that they used to describe their feminine leadership were those most closely associated with emotion, like compassionate and enthusiastic. Other words that emerged in the Athena Doctrine studies included team building and curiosity. The hottest leadership models out there today, like transformational leadership, emotional intelligence, servant leadership, all feature traits that are considered feminine, including empathy, strategic use of emotion, and wanting to serve a purpose greater than oneself. So, armed with that research, I want to give you some advice. It's advice that I wish I had when I was a college student, and it's advice I give to everyone I mentor, regardless of gender, regardless of life stage. I'm going to talk about 3 traits that make good leaders great. And if you develop these traits, you can use them to succeed in any organization, regardless of your gender and regardless of rank. This last part is really key because unless you're starting out at the top, leading up and leading from alongside are going to matter a lot for where you're going. At some point in your life, you will sit at a table where you feel you don't fit in, but where you're going to be expected to contribute. Chances are you'll become a leader before you realize that you are one, much like me. Chances are you may be one already. First, be a team builder. Treat everyone like a teammate. From the second you walk into the door of an organization, treat everyone like a teammate. Act like you want to be a member of the team. And if someone walks in the door of your organization, treat them like a teammate as well. The new people will still need to prove themselves, don't get me wrong, but they'll do it a lot better if you show them that you have their back and that you want them to succeed. I'm going to tell you how I learned about this from the male warfighters that I work with. They helped my academic dreams come true. I've always wanted to do work that was relevant in the policy world. So 2 years ago, I started a project on information warfare. And I was really passionate about this project. My students and colleagues saw me in the hallways talking about it incessantly and covering whiteboards with diagrams day after day. One day, I walked into my office and I was really frustrated. And I exclaimed to my office mate, a Marine Lieutenant Colonel, I forgot my computer charger. Now, this might not seem like a big deal, but for an academic, not having your computer is like losing your brain for an entire day. So my office mate sprang into action on his phone. And before I even sat down in my chair, 5 Marines had texted me and said, go into my office, and even if I'm not there, go into my desk drawer and take my charger, no problem. That day, my colleagues showed me that they valued my contribution to the fight, even though I made it in a way very differently than many of them had. I didn't know that a law review article could be a weapon of war, but they may have known something I didn't. I was invited to present that article at the Pentagon. And when I was, my colleagues and my students took hours out of their day to prepare me for that meeting. To the extent I succeeded, it was because I was a member of that team. Number 2, curiosity is a form of courage. All over the world, people surveyed said that curiosity is a feminine leadership trait. I was surprised by that, but it seems to be associated with humility and vulnerability, both of which are also feminine leadership traits. And it's associated with humility and vulnerability because curiosity means that you're willing to admit that there's something you don't know. I found also that research on diversity in organizations shows that someone who comes from the outside or is different than in an organization, maybe the odd person out of the table, is more likely to question the assumptions on which that organization is based. Any organization is based on a set of assumptions and values. People within that organization don't always question those assumptions and values, either because they take them for granted or sometimes because they want to avoid conflict. But any organization needs to question its assumptions in order to innovate. At that table back in 2016 in a room full of warfighters, I had a lot of questions. I had been in civilian academia teaching for about a decade before that, and I had a lot of questions about why we do certain things in professional military education and how we teach and why. Afterwards, an infantryman twice my size came up to me, and I was afraid I had committed some sort of insubordination. But he thanked me. He said, "You're asking the questions that everyone else is afraid to ask." As another colleague explained to me later, the military faculty has been in the organization for 20 years. They know that having been in the military for so long, there are certain assumptions that they make. They fear groupthink. And the best thing they can do to fight it is bring someone from the outside in order to question their assumptions. So they brought me in. And to my great surprise, They listened. Curiosity is a leadership superpower when it's deployed with respect. 3, empathy and emotion are leadership tools. Give me some Zoom reactions again. How many of you have ever been told that showing emotion is a form of weakness? Yes. So, research on leadership says otherwise. All over the world, people surveyed had said that they want more expressive leaders who show their feelings more openly and honestly. Again, I think I learned this best from male warfighters more than anything I'd ever learned in school. A Marine colonel friend taught me that there's a saying that a commander's greatest tool is his compassion. I understood exactly what he said the moment he said it because I'd learned it in feminist legal theory. See, anyone who has the power to make and enforce rules or give orders does so because they believe that doing so will be fair or just or best to achieve a particular goal. But the best leaders also understand that these rules or orders will have impact on actual human beings and implement them with compassion. I found this out best when I was so new at Marine Corps University and my childcare canceled at the last minute late one night. I was the only woman with kids on the faculty at the time. I hadn't built up any time to take leave yet, and I didn't know how men who had deployed with their families all over the world were going to react to this. But my dean just said, "Don't worry about it. We've all been there. We'll find someone to fill in." My colleagues' empathy, though, was even better. See, I really hate missing class. I don't like to do that to my students. So the next day, in one room, I taught a class on strategy. And in the next room, a lieutenant colonel, a naval commander, and a PhD watched my son while they worked on the curriculum. They all really liked the same 80s music. My team's empathy, the whole team's empathy, enabled us to find the best solution to achieve our mission that day. Empathy and emotion deployed with respect are a leadership tool. So last spring, when a retired senior military officer asked me at a reception in Quantico, "How did someone with your background get here?" I said, "I don't understand the question." He repeated it, and finally I said, "I wanted to serve my country, so I got on I-95. And I went to talk to someone about information warfare." I've learned more about these traits that make good leaders great, whether they're feminine leadership traits or not, from the male war fighters that I work with, than in any women's leadership program I've ever been a part of. And that is a little strange because the male warfighters that I work with probably don't want to think of these as feminine leadership traits. But that's an example of exactly why we need to shift the conversation about gender. Discussion of male leadership traits, feminine leadership traits, male leadership styles, female leadership styles, these all have value, but they can get really divisive really quickly. Instead, by talking about the traits that make good leaders great, we can have a more inclusive discussion and empower a diverse set of leaders to be the best that they can be. I still don't fit into a room full of warfighters, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that they keep inviting me into the room. And not only that, to their great credit, that room looks more diverse every single year. And if you work on the traits that make good leaders great, doors are going to open for you too. If working with the Marine Corps has taught me one thing, it's this: leadership is not about rank, and it's not about gender. It's about respect. Respect for people, for their potential, and what they can contribute to a team. Thank you.